And I call the honourable member for Braddon.
Well, I thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the House for this opportunity to address the matters relating to this very, very important piece of legislation. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think there's a real sense of lightness coming over business. It's coming over the departments of government, and there is a realisation that for too long now governments have been standing in the way of business getting about doing what they do best, and that is to remove compliance costs, remove duplication, and to ensure that business is just freed up to service their customers, to do good work, to do good business, to make a good profit, and more importantly, to employ great Australians. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's not just us saying that there is a lightness coming across this country, but it is many other people outside of this place. People like the CEO of Westpac, Gail Kelly, who said this: "The government is showing that Australia is open for business. There is a deregulation and a reduction of red tape, and it's underway." Well, what about Tony Nicholson, the Executive Director of the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, who said these words: "We warmly welcome the government's red tape reduction agenda. Streamlining our reporting and compliance requirements makes a real difference as it frees up resources to be directed towards helping disadvantaged young families." Who would have ever thought, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this very piece of legislation, and the one that came before it, version 1 if I can say, back in the autumn session, would in fact get out of the way of organisations such as the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, to the point where they say it actually frees up our resources to now get about the business that we are actually about, and that's helping the disadvantaged people of this great country. So I found it interesting in the early stages of this debate, when those opposite, Mr Deputy Speaker, stood like soldiers in a row to actually mock Repeal Day, to mock this legislation that goes about deregulating and removing duplication and doing everything it can to get out of the road of business, talking out of the side of their mouth with mockery about what this legislation does, laughing at maybe a piece of legislation that may be a little crazy, but it might have removed $250,000 or $500,000 or $2 million worth of compliance costs that were actually being having to be paid by business across this country. Well, I don't see it, Mr Deputy Speaker, as a laughing matter at all. But I think it goes to show where the mindset of those opposite actually is when it comes to running business in this country. For in fact, this government, who had 6 years, as we know, 6 very interesting years, I must say, from 2007 to 2013, they were going to be, as they were in many other areas, to be the messiah of deregulation, to be the great white hope of getting rid of the impediments of business in this country. And in little more than 5.5 years, you won't believe this, but the Labor Party, the Labor government, introduced more than 21,000 additional regulations. Now, this is despite, Mr Deputy Speaker, Kevin Rudd, Kevin 07, promising this, and I quote, "one regulation in and one regulation out." That was his policy then to small business, coupled together with the Small Business Minister, Craig Emerson. Well, I think they lost their way. I think they lost their way, Mr Deputy Speaker. They forgot that they made a promise of one regulation in and one regulation out. They misinterpreted it. They interpreted it to be one Prime Minister in and one Prime Minister out. They lost their focus. Well, business doesn't want their government to lose focus, and this government is not losing focus when it comes to getting out of the way of business in this country. Small Business Minister Craig Emerson, as referred to by the colleague that spoke before me, the member for Ford, said in 2008 that Labor would take a giant pair of scissors to the red tape that is strangling small business. Well, again, Mr Deputy Speaker, sad I have to make this announcement to the Parliament, but they lost their way. They lost their way, but they didn't lose the scissors. The scissors didn't end up cutting red tape. The scissors ended up in the back of 2 Prime Ministers of this country. They should have been focusing on using the scissors to get rid of the red tape that they promised they would, but they didn't. and, as I said, 21,000 additional pieces of legislation, or regulation, I should say, was introduced under the previous Labor government. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, as we have done on this side of the House, I could join the queue and come up with 100, 200, 500 examples of the deregulation agenda that this government has been promoting. We started with our first Repeal Day back in March. We've had our second Repeal Day, as we promised, and these Repeal Days will go on under the leadership of the Parliamentary Secretary, the Prime Minister, who is doing a great job. But his job is being made much more easy by a change in culture in this place, a change in culture from the very top, a change in culture led by the Prime Minister of this country, a Prime Minister that says this is what will define our government when it comes to small business. We are going to get the heck out of their road. And he has passed that culture on to his cabinet ministers, to the outer ministry, to the staffers of those ministers and to the departments that those ministers lead. And that's what leadership from the top is all about. It's changing culture. And that's what this government is about. That's what we were elected to do in 2013. We were given a mandate to change the culture in this country on a wide range of fronts, whether it was getting the heck out of the way of small business, whether or not it was changing the attitude when it comes to the payment of social services in this country, when it comes to the culture of higher education, when it comes to the culture of actually getting on and investing in this country. The culture change has to be led from the front. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, those opposite can do everything they want to try and devalue this government, to devalue me as a backbencher, any of our ministers, or even, in fact, the Prime Minister. But what they fail to tell you is they were not culture changes. They were not culture changes. They were just culture embracers of their own political history and their own political ideology. And where did it get us? Where did it get us, Mr Deputy Speaker? It got us to a point where we're basically in huge debt and deficit disaster zone. It is shameful, as the member for Bass just said behind me. It is shameful. And they mock every day when they come in here. Mr Deputy Speaker, they would have no clue. They would have no clue how to get us out of this debt and deficit disaster. They've created the mess, but they have no clue, and no courage, no guts, no fortitude, no vision, no willingness to actually get us out of the disaster zone that we currently find ourselves in. And I just find it extraordinary that they can mock even a bill as such as this, and yet they make no attempt to tell the truth when it comes to the mess that we have inherited. This is not about us claiming victim status on this side of the House, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is about a government elected with a mandate to clean up the mess. And you know what? I've come to the conclusion, and I speak as the member for Braddon, that everyone still to this day, I shouldn't say everyone, most to this day, when they see me up the street, whether I'm collecting my mail, getting my newspaper or getting money from the bank or getting coffee, they say, the job's got to be done, Brett. Stick at it. Stick at it. But what I find is that when the tough decisions have to be made, the ones on which we were elected to actually do, and they still ask us to do it, I say to the people of Braddon and I say to the people of this country, we can't sit back and say, make the tough decision, Prime Minister, make the tough decision, Minister for Defence, make the tough decision, Minister for Social Services, make the tough decision, the Minister for Communication, make the tough decision, Treasurer, but make sure the toughness only impacts my neighbour and not me. Not me. Well, it doesn't work that way, country. It doesn't work that way, fellow Australians. We are a team. We are Team Australia. These on the other side may mock that, but we are a team. We are a young team. We're a small team. We're a powerful team in the top 20 nations of this world. But we have to get in and do the job together. We dig the hole together, we fill it in together, we grow the crop together, and we reap the harvest together. That's what we do. We don't blame it on everybody else and say, you do the tough stuff. I need to do the tough stuff. So we can all sit back and say, well, don't hurt me, just make it for someone else. Well, this is not about hurting anyone. This is about growing our future. This is about my kids and my grandkids, the grandkids that I don't have yet. I don't have them yet, but I don't want them inheriting the mess that we've actually inherited. $667,000 million of debt if we don't do anything. Well, we're doing something. And I've said in this place before, and I'll say it again, if it costs me my seat, which I hope and pray it doesn't because I'll be working my tail off to ensure it doesn't, but if it does, and I leave a legacy of improvement, if I leave a legacy of hope, if I leave a legacy that will actually give some sense of optimism for my kids and my grandkids, well, it's all been worth it. But they don't get it on that side. It's all about political expediency. It's all about the now. They will do anything right now, Mr Deputy Speaker, anything just to damage the government, to give an impression of chaos, to give an impression that they will deliver every piece of candy to every child, adult and family in this country. But I ask the question of those opposite, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? They have never seen a dollar or a 10-cent coin that they'd never spend. Never spend. They've stolen from our children, they've stolen from our grandchildren, and enough is enough. Enough is enough. It's time that those opposite actually acknowledge the mess they put us in and stop trying to rewrite history. They've walked away from the fire that they lit, mocked the firemen on the way out the garden path, and left town. Left town. They don't want to know about it, and I say to the people of Australia, do not fall for it. Do not fall for it. We left an economy in good shape. $20 billion surplus every year, money in the bank, and what have we got now? We've got accumulated deficits of $123 million to the eye can see. It's unbelievable. But they just sit back and say, nothing to see here, Mr Deputy Speaker, nothing to see here. They cannot and will not show restraint. And today we even see it again. They continue to mock every policy that we come up with, even though we have a mandate on most of those fronts. And even, I couldn't believe the other day, the Leader of the Opposition, strutting his stuff in front of the camera as he does every day, said, well, they want to do this, they want to make this change or they want to implement this policy, they need to go and get a mandate. Well, for goodness sake, we got a mandate on the carbon tax, for goodness sake, and they wouldn't vote to get rid of it. They had to depend on the crossbenchers to get it through, and thankfully they saw common sense. So what an absolute hypocrite we have in the Leader of Opposition. Go and get a mandate, he says, to make himself look like this great democratic leader of our country. Go and get a mandate, for goodness sake. The people of Australia gave us a mandate on September 13, 2013. And what do we see? They have knocked back everything that we actually said we would do, and we went to the people and said we're going to do this, this, this and this, and even that's not a mandate for those opposite. They just want to cause chaos. They want to sabotage the future of our country, the economic prospects and hope of my children and my grandchildren. I've had enough, and I'm prepared to stand up and fight for it. And even when it comes down to issues such as this bill, as mocking as they may be, this is a symbol of what this government stands for. This is a symbol of where this government wants to take this country. This is a symbol of a Prime Minister, a Cabinet and a Ministry of people that want to change the culture in this country. And I believe that's what the people of Australia want. If they want weak-kneed leadership, a mama and a papa that'll give every kid every lolly every day of the week when they go to the show, fatten them up because that's what they want, well, people of Australia, you'll get what you wish for. But if you want a government that's prepared to actually invest in your future and make sure that there is going to be a pension for yourself or your own parents right now in 25 years' time, well, get with the program. We cannot afford it. We have to rein in expenditure. We have to make the changes to policy that are just unsustainable. This is not some game we're talking about. This is the future of our country. We are in a competitive fight to the death when it comes to our products and our services across the world. But this lot over here just think it's some sort of, gee whizzer ride at the local agricultural show. Well, it's not. It's our future. It's our future that we have to fight for, and we have made a commitment to the people of Australia, and we will leave this parliament in the last sitting week of 2014 recommitting to that future, that we will get it under control. We will move on the debt and deficit disaster. We will continue to fight for small business, to make it possible for them to grow and make profits and to employ people and get this economy moving. But it takes everyone, Mr Deputy Speaker. It takes everyone. You might not be a small business owner, but you depend on them to employ your children, and I implore people as they listen as we end this week to understand the journey that we're on and the journey we need to take. I thank the House.
I thank the honourable member for Braddon. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak on Omnibus Repeal Spring 2014 bill, but before I do, it would be absolutely remiss of me if I didn't acknowledge the significant, substantial, nay, outstanding contribution made by the member for Braddon. Now, not only is he an exceptional member for that electorate, I think it appropriate that he was accompanied into the chamber and supported by his two fellow amigos from Tasmania. I've learnt one thing from these three gentlemen in my short time in this place, is that when you fight collectively on behalf of your state, you achieve so much more. And so I wasn't surprised to look around the chamber and see, supporting the member for Braddon, we had the members for Lyne and Bass, and what a credit they are to their state.